Have you ever stood in the quiet of the night, your chest heavy, your thoughts louder than the silence, and felt torn? One part of you pulling toward comfort, another part whispering that comfort is costing you everything. Fear says, run. Hurt says, break. Desire says, take. And yet beneath all that noise, there is something else. Not loud, not urgent, steady. A voice that doesn't beg, doesn't rush. It simply waits. Most people never listen to it. And because they don't, they spend their lives reacting instead of choosing. Tonight, you're going to confront that voice and decide who truly rules your life. We live in a world that tells you to trust your feelings, to follow your heart, to move with whatever emotion rises strongest in the moment. But look around. People are more anxious than ever, more reactive, more exhausted, more lost. Not because life is harder, but because their inner world has no order. A single comment ruins their day. A moment of doubt derails years of effort. A surge of emotion dictates decisions they later regret. The Stoics saw this problem long before modern life amplified it. They understood that the real battlefield is not outside you. It is inside your mind. Because whoever controls the mind controls the direction of the life. This film is not about suppressing emotion. It's about refusing to be ruled by it. It's about training the mind to stand firm when fear shouts, when anger burns, when desire clouds judgment. By the end of this journey, you will understand why peace is not a feeling, why discipline is freedom, and why the strongest people are not the loudest, but the most controlled. This is not motivation. This is not comfort. This is training. And it begins where all real change begins, inside the mind. The real battlefield is the mind. There is a moment most people never talk about. Not when life is loud, not when everything is burning, but when the world goes quiet, late at night, early morning, that space where distractions fade and you are left alone with your thoughts. That is where the truth usually shows up. Because when nothing is pulling at you from the outside, you begin to notice something unsettling. The noise isn't coming from the world, it's coming from you. Thoughts rise without permission, memories replay, fears whisper, regrets surface. Imagined futures begin to feel real, and suddenly, without anything actually happening, your chest tightens, your breathing changes, your peace dissolves. This is the moment most people misunderstand. They assume the battle is external. They believe something out there is attacking them. But the Stoics saw this clearly long before modern psychology gave it language. The real battlefield has never been outside. It has always been inside the mind. Every war you fight in life, stress, fear, insecurity, anger, doubt, begins as a thought before it becomes an emotion. And that matters, because emotions feel powerful, but they do not arrive first. They follow thought. A single interpretation becomes a feeling. That feeling becomes a reaction. That reaction becomes a decision. And over time, those decisions shape a life. This is why two people can face the same event and walk away completely different. One collapses, the other stands. The difference is not strength, it is not intelligence, it is not luck, it is what happened in the mind. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire under constant threat, betrayal, war, political pressure, death. These were not abstract ideas for him. Yet he reminded himself daily, you have power over your mind, not outside events. That was not philosophy for comfort. It was survival. Because if the mind collapses, everything else follows. When the mind is undisciplined, emotions rush in like a storm. They arrive fast, they feel convincing, they demand immediate action. Fear insists something terrible is happening. Anger insists retaliation is necessary. Despair insists the situation is permanent. But emotions do not see clearly. They amplify, they exaggerate, they distort. Left unchecked, they do not guide you forward, they scatter you. This is why people say things they regret, make decisions they cannot undo, walk away from opportunities that never return, not because they were evil, not because they were weak, but because in that moment, the mind surrendered its role. The Stoics understood that clarity is not natural, it is trained. Without training, the mind becomes reactive, a place where every passing thought feels urgent, every feeling feels authoritative, every impulse feels justified. And once that happens, peace becomes fragile. That's why small disappointments feel unbearable, why minor criticism cuts deep, why a single setback can unravel months of progress. The structure inside was never reinforced. Think about it honestly. How often does your peace depend on things going right? How easily does one message, one glance, one thought pull you off balance? That sensitivity is not a personality trait. It is a symptom. It means the mind has not been fortified. The Stoics compared the mind to a city. A city without walls does not need a powerful enemy. Any disturbance can enter. Noise becomes invasion, emotion becomes command, chaos becomes normal. And once chaos feels normal, people stop questioning it. They say, "That's just how I am." But it isn't. It's how they've been trained, or rather, how they've not been trained. Modern life makes this worse. We are constantly stimulated, rarely still, always reacting. There is no space to observe thought, no pause to question it, no discipline to slow it down. So whatever appears in the mind is immediately believed. If it feels heavy, it must be true. If it feels urgent, it must be acted on. If it feels painful, it must define reality. But the Stoics rejected this completely. They understood that the mind must lead, or the emotions will. And emotions were never designed to rule. They are messengers, not commanders. Signals, not strategy. When the mind abdicates its role, life becomes reactive instead of deliberate. You stop choosing, you start responding, and slowly, without noticing, your inner world becomes unstable. That instability doesn't stay inside. It leaks into relationships, into work, into decisions, into self-respect. You begin to feel like life is happening to you instead of being shaped by you. This is the cost of an untrained mind, not failure, not disaster, but erosion, a gradual weakening of clarity, discipline, and inner authority. The Stoics knew that to win any external battle, the internal one must be settled first. Before courage, before endurance, before wisdom, there must be clarity. And clarity does not appear by accident. It is built, slowly, daily, deliberately. This is why they returned again and again to the same practices: reflection, journaling, silence, examination of thought, not to suppress emotion, but to place it in its proper position. Because when the mind is trained, storms still come, but they do not decide your direction. The waves may rise, but the helm remains steady. And that is the difference between surviving life and being ruled by it. This is where everything begins, not with changing circumstances, not with chasing motivation, not with controlling the world, but with reclaiming authority over the mind. Because once the mind stands firm, everything else follows. choosing your master every day. Whether you notice it or not, you are being led, not always by people, not always by circumstances, but by a voice inside you. Sometimes it is loud, urgent, demanding. Other times it is quiet, almost easy to miss. And the direction of your life is determined by which one you obey. Fear speaks first for most people. It tells you to run, to avoid discomfort, to retreat before you are exposed. Hurt speaks next. It tells you to break, to withdraw, to harden yourself so nothing can reach you again. Desire follows close behind. It whispers, take what you can, relief now, comfort now, satisfaction before consequence. These voices feel powerful because they are emotional. They arrive with sensation, with urgency, with pressure. And because they are loud, people assume they are important. But beneath all of that, beneath the noise, the pull, the agitation, there is another voice. It does not shout. It does not panic. It does not rush you. It waits. It says very little. Stand, think, choose. Most people never hear this voice clearly, not because it is weak, but because they never slow down enough to notice it. This quieter voice is reason, clarity, judgment. It is the part of you that sees consequences, the part that understands time, the part that can endure discomfort without being consumed by it. The Stoics believed this voice should rule, not because emotions are wrong, but because they are unstable. Emotion reacts to what is happening now. Reason considers what happens next. And every meaningful life is built by those who learn to prioritize the second over the first. This is where the choice becomes unavoidable. You cannot serve two masters. Either emotion leads or the mind does. When emotion leads, life feels intense. Everything matters immediately. Every feeling feels like a command. You say things you later wish you had paused on. You make decisions that solve the moment, but damage the future. When reason leads, life feels quieter, not easier, but steadier. You feel emotions fully, but you do not hand them authority. You allow them to speak, but not to decide. This distinction changes everything, because the real danger is not feeling fear, it is obeying fear. The real danger is not feeling anger, it is acting from it. The real danger is not desire, it is allowing desire to override judgment. Most regret does not come from ignorance. It comes from moments when people knew better but followed feeling anyway. They felt the urge and mistook it for truth. They felt the pressure and mistook it for necessity. They felt the pain and mistook it for permanence. The Stoics warned against this repeatedly. They understood that emotions are persuasive liars. They exaggerate, they dramatize, they narrow your vision. In the heat of emotion, the future disappears. Only the present moment feels real. And this is how lives get steered off course, not through one catastrophic decision, but through many small moments of surrender. Surrender to anger, surrender to fear, surrender to comfort. Each one seems minor. Together, they form a pattern where clarity weakens and reaction strengthens. This is why the Stoics emphasized inner command, not control over the world, control over oneself. Epictetus said that no one is free who is not master of himself. Freedom, to the Stoics, was not doing whatever you felt. It was the ability to act according to reason, even when emotion resisted. That kind of freedom is rare, because it requires discomfort. It requires pausing when everything in you wants to act. It requires restraint when reaction feels justified. It requires silence when expression would be easier. And most people mistake restraint for weakness. They think calm is passivity. They think silence is surrender. But restraint is strength. It is strength delayed, strength measured, strength that does not need to prove itself. The quiet voice inside you is not passive. It is patient. It waits for you to stop reacting long enough to hear it clearly. And when you do, it does not overwhelm you with emotion. It gives you direction, not certainty, not comfort, direction. It tells you when to move forward slowly, when to endure instead of escape, when to act despite fear. This is why the Stoics valued stillness, not because they wanted emotional numbness, but because stillness reveals truth. When the mind is calm, you see what emotion was hiding. You see exaggeration for what it is. You see impulse as temporary. You see that many things you felt compelled to do were never necessary. This is also why modern life is so dangerous to clarity. Noise drowns out judgment. Speed replaces thought. Constant stimulation keeps emotion in control. There is no pause, and without pause, there is no choice. You simply react. Choosing your master is not a dramatic moment. It is not a single declaration. It is a daily decision. Every time something provokes you, there is a fork in the road. You can follow the surge, or you can step back and listen. Every time you are hurt, you can let pain decide your response, or you can let reason shape it. Every time you feel fear, you can retreat immediately, or you can examine whether fear deserves obedience. Over time, these choices compound. One path leads to volatility, the other leads to stability. One leads to regret, the other leads to self-respect. The Stoics believed that peace is not the absence of emotion, it is the presence of order inside the mind. When order exists, emotions no longer dominate. They inform, they signal, but they do not command. This is what it means to choose your master, not to deny feeling, but to place it under authority. Because whichever voice you follow consistently will shape who you become. Follow emotion, and life will feel intense but unstable. Follow reason, and life will feel demanding but grounded. This is the choice before you every day. And once you become aware of it, you cannot pretend it isn't there. The quiet voice will keep waiting. The question is whether you will keep ignoring it, or finally let it lead. How modern life hijacks the mind. The danger today is not that life is too hard, it's that life is too loud. Never in history have people been so constantly stimulated, so continuously informed, and so internally unsettled. The modern world does not attack the body first. It attacks attention, and whoever controls attention eventually controls thought. Most people wake up already invaded. Before they have formed a single independent idea, they reach for a screen. And in seconds, other people's fears, opinions, expectations, and comparisons flood the mind. There is no pause, no filter, no resistance. The mind is open ground. A careless scroll becomes a storm in the chest. Not because anything terrible happened, but because something felt terrible. A photograph triggers comparison. A headline triggers anxiety. A comment triggers doubt. And before the day has even begun, the nervous system is already activated. This is how peace is lost without notice. People assume stress comes from big problems, but most stress today comes from small, repeated intrusions that never give the mind time to recover. The Stoics warned about this long before screens existed. They understood that the mind becomes what it repeatedly entertains. not what it occasionally touches, what it dwells on. Modern life trains people to dwell on everything: news they cannot influence, arguments they are not part of, images that distort reality, opinions that were never requested. All of it enters the mind uninvited, and because it arrives through emotion, shock, outrage, desire, envy, it feels important. But importance is not the same as relevance. Most of what floods the modern mind has no bearing on your character, your discipline, or your purpose. Yet it consumes enormous mental energy. This is why people feel exhausted without having done anything difficult. The mind has been working overtime, reacting to noise instead of shaping direction. Social comparison is especially corrosive. You look at someone else's highlight and compare it to your behind the scenes. You see curated success and measure it against private struggle. And slowly, without evidence, a thought forms. I am behind. That thought becomes a feeling. That feeling becomes a belief. And that belief shapes behavior. Not because it is true, but because it was repeated often enough. The Stoics would have rejected this immediately. They knew that comparison weakens judgment, because it shifts attention away from what you control and anchors it to what you don't. You cannot live deliberately while constantly measuring yourself against illusions. Yet modern culture encourages exactly that. Scroll, compare, react, repeat. There is no room left for reflection. And reflection is where wisdom grows. Another quiet danger is emotional reasoning. This is the habit of assuming that because something feels true, it must be true. You feel overwhelmed, so you conclude life is overwhelming. You feel unworthy, so you conclude you lack value. You feel afraid, so you assume danger is present. But emotions are not evidence. They are responses. They react to interpretation, not reality itself. The Stoics understood this distinction clearly. They taught that it is not events that disturb us, but the judgments we attach to them. Modern life blurs this line constantly. It trains people to trust feeling over thought, reaction over reflection. And when that happens, the mind stops questioning itself. Every emotion becomes a verdict. Every mood becomes an identity. I feel lost, therefore I am lost. I feel anxious, therefore something is wrong. I feel discouraged, therefore I should stop. This is not self-awareness. It is surrender. The mind has handed its authority to sensation. And once that happens, clarity becomes rare. Another problem is speed. Everything moves fast. Information updates constantly. Opinions form instantly. Responses are expected immediately. There is no cultural patience anymore, but reason requires time. Judgment develops slowly. Insight arrives quietly. The Stoics believed haste was dangerous, not because action is bad, but because action without thought is destructive. Modern life encourages instant reaction. Say something now, post something now, decide something now. But decisions made at speed are usually decisions made without depth. This is why people regret things they said online, why they burn bridges impulsively, why they make permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. The environment encourages it, and unless you resist, you absorb the habit. Even silence has become uncomfortable. People cannot sit without stimulation. A moment alone feels empty instead of restorative. So they fill it with noise, with content, with distraction. But a mind that is never quiet cannot hear itself. And a mind that cannot hear itself cannot govern itself. The Stoics practiced intentional withdrawal for this reason. Not escape, clarification. They stepped away from noise to re-establish internal order. They understood that if you do not choose what enters your mind, everything will enter, and most of it will not serve you. Another subtle hijack is outrage. Outrage feels powerful. It gives the illusion of moral clarity, but outrage consumes attention without producing wisdom. It keeps the mind tense, reactive, and fragmented. The Stoics avoided it deliberately. They knew that anger narrows vision. When the mind is angry, it cannot reason clearly. Yet modern platforms reward outrage. The angrier the response, the more attention it receives. This trains people to live in a constant state of agitation. Calm becomes boring. Restraint becomes invisible. And over time, people lose the ability to think without emotion attached. This is why small inconveniences feel catastrophic, why disagreement feels like attack, why patience feels impossible. The nervous system is constantly activated, and a constantly activated mind cannot be disciplined. This is not accidental. A distracted mind is easier to influence. An agitated mind is easier to steer. A reactive mind is easier to control. The Stoics would have recognized this immediately. They warned against giving external forces access to your inner world, because once your inner world is governed from the outside, freedom is already lost. Modern life does not ask permission. It enters through habit. The phone in your pocket, the screen in your room, the notifications that interrupt thought. None of them are neutral. They shape attention. They shape emotion. They shape judgment. And unless you consciously resist, they will train your mind for you. Not toward clarity, toward reactivity. This is why so many people feel mentally scattered. They are not weak. They are overstimulated. They are not broken. They are unfocused. They have never been taught how to guard the mind. The Stoics believed that peace was a skill, not a personality trait, not a gift, a discipline. It required boundaries, intentional limits, deliberate reduction. They would have found modern excess exhausting, not because information is bad, but because quantity without discernment destroys quality. A mind filled with everything cannot hold what matters. This chapter is not about rejecting modern life. It is about recognizing its cost. If you do not protect your attention, you will lose your clarity. If you do not slow your thinking, you will be driven by emotion. If you do not choose what enters your mind, you will think thoughts that are not your own. And eventually, you will live a life that does not feel like it belongs to you. The Stoics offered a different path. Less noise, more intention, less reaction, more reflection. Not because life should be small, but because the mind must be strong. And strength begins where distraction ends. The cost of emotional rule. Emotional rule is expensive, not in ways you notice immediately, not in dramatic collapses every time, but in quiet losses that accumulate, words spoken that cannot be taken back, doors closed that never reopen, years spent circling the same ground because a moment of feeling was allowed to decide the future. Most people never calculate this cost. They only feel the relief of expression in the moment, the release of saying what was held back, the comfort of escaping discomfort. But relief is not freedom, and expression is not wisdom. The Stoics warned that emotional obedience creates a life of reaction, and reaction always charges interest. Think back honestly. How many arguments in your life started not from necessity, but from emotion demanding expression? How many relationships fractured because anger was allowed to speak before reason had time to intervene. How many opportunities were abandoned because fear insisted you were not ready, not worthy, not capable? None of those decisions felt irrational at the time. They felt true. That is the danger. Emotions convince you they are trustworthy because they feel immediate and personal, but they are narrow. They see only the present moment. They ignore consequence. They erase perspective. The Stoics saw this clearly. They observed that people ruined their lives not through lack of ability, but through lack of restraint. Talented men undone by impatience, gifted women derailed by resentment, capable people trapped in cycles because they never learned to pause. Emotion does not plan, it reacts, and a life built on reaction will always feel unstable. This is why emotional rule produces inconsistency. One day committed, the next day withdrawn. One moment inspired, the next moment defeated. Not because the person lacks character, but because the mind never established authority. When emotion rules, discipline collapses. You train only when motivated. You speak truth only when comfortable. You endure only when it feels manageable. The moment discomfort rises, emotion votes to quit. And because emotion has been given power, the vote passes. This is how potential erodes, not in one dramatic failure, but in repeated surrender. The Stoics understood that greatness is not built by intensity. It is built by consistency. And consistency is impossible when emotions decide behavior. Consider the number of people who felt called to something greater. They felt passion, they felt conviction, they felt certainty. And then pressure arrived. Criticism, delay, isolation, fear, and the feeling changed. So the direction changed, not because the calling disappeared, but because emotion replaced reason. This is the tragedy of emotional rule. It convinces people that changing direction is wisdom, when often it is avoidance. Another cost is peace. A person ruled by emotion is rarely at rest. Their inner world rises and falls with circumstance. A compliment lifts them, a slight devastates them. They are constantly adjusting, constantly responding, constantly exhausted. Peace becomes conditional. If things go well, I'll be calm. If people approve, I'll be steady. If circumstances improve, I'll be okay. The Stoics rejected this completely. They believed peace must be internal, or it is not peace at all. Because anything dependent on circumstance can be taken. Emotional rule ties peace to things you do not control. That is a form of captivity. Another cost is clarity. Emotion narrows vision. When fear dominates, everything looks dangerous. When anger dominates, everything looks offensive. When desire dominates, everything looks urgent. In these states, you cannot see reality as it is. You see it as emotion paints it. The Stoics believed clarity was sacred. They trained themselves to step back from immediate reaction to regain perspective. They understood that most suffering comes not from what happens, but from misjudging what happens. Emotional rule multiplies suffering. It turns inconvenience into injustice, delay into disaster, mistake into identity. This is why emotional living feels heavy. Every moment carries extra weight. Everything matters too much. Another cost is dignity. When emotion rules, you explain too much. You justify yourself unnecessarily. You defend impulsively. You reveal things that should have remained private. Later, when calm returns, you wonder why you said what you said. But the damage is already done. Dignity cannot be recovered through explanation. The Stoics believed dignity was preserved through restraint, by speaking less, by reacting slower, by allowing time to cool emotion before giving it expression. They understood that silence at times was not weakness, it was protection. Another cost is trust. People trust consistency, not intensity. When your behavior shifts with every emotional current, people do not know what to expect from you. Today calm, tomorrow explosive, today committed, tomorrow distant. This unpredictability erodes confidence, not only in others, but in yourself. You begin to doubt your own promises because you know how easily emotion overrides them. This internal distrust is devastating. It weakens resolve, it fractures identity. You no longer know which version of yourself will show up. The Stoics believed self-trust was built through alignment, doing what reason dictates even when emotion resists. Over time, this creates integrity, and integrity creates strength. Emotional rule also costs time. Years are lost to indecision, to hesitation, to waiting for the feeling to change. Most people do not fail because they lacked opportunity. They fail because they waited for certainty, for confidence, for motivation. Emotion kept telling them, not yet. Time kept moving anyway. The Stoics were ruthless about time. They knew it was finite. They knew delay was expensive. They understood that action must sometimes precede confidence, because confidence is often the result, not the prerequisite. Emotional rule reverses this order. It says, feel ready, then act. Reason says, act, and readiness will follow. This is why emotional rule keeps people stuck. It feels cautious, it feels safe, but it slowly drains momentum. The final cost is growth. Growth requires friction, discomfort, exposure. Emotion resists all three. It seeks relief, not refinement. The Stoics accepted discomfort as necessary, not because they enjoyed suffering, but because they understood its role. A mind that avoids discomfort remains weak. A mind that learns to endure becomes resilient. Emotional rule avoids pain at all costs. Reason tolerates pain for long-term gain. That difference determines outcomes. This chapter is not an attack on feeling. It is a warning about obedience. Feelings are part of being human, but when they rule, they exact a price most people never calculate until it is too late. The Stoics believed freedom was the ability to choose rightly, even when it was hard. Emotional rule removes that freedom. It replaces choice with impulse, and impulse always costs more than it promises. Training the mind. At some point, understanding is no longer enough. You can see the pattern, you can name the problem, you can even explain it clearly. And still, nothing changes. This is where most people stall. They confuse awareness with transformation. They mistake insight for discipline. But insight without training is just information. The Stoics knew this. They did not treat philosophy as something to admire. They treated it as something to practice. Because the mind does not become strong by knowing what is right. It becomes strong by repeating what is right until it holds under pressure. Training the mind is not inspirational. It is repetitive, often boring, frequently uncomfortable. And that is exactly why it works. Emotion is powerful because it is practiced constantly. You have rehearsed reaction for years. You react without thinking. You assume without questioning. You feel and immediately follow. That habit did not appear overnight, and it will not disappear overnight. The Stoics understood that the mind must be retrained the same way the body is trained, not through intensity, through consistency. A single workout does nothing. A single moment of clarity does nothing. What matters is repetition under resistance. This is where many people resist. They want a breakthrough moment, a realization that fixes everything. But the Stoics believed strength was built in small, unglamorous acts of discipline. They practiced pausing before speaking, questioning thoughts before believing them, enduring discomfort without escape, not because they were emotionless, but because they refused to be ruled. This is the pivot. You stop asking, "How do I feel right now?" And you start asking, "What is the right response?" That question alone changes posture. It places reason back in command. Training the mind begins with slowing the moment, not stopping life, but inserting a pause between stimulus and response. That pause is where power lives. Without it, reaction is automatic. With it, choice returns. The Stoics practiced this relentlessly. When insulted, they delayed response. When afraid, they examined the fear. When tempted, they questioned the impulse. They did not trust the first thought, because the first thought is usually emotional. They trusted the second thought, the one that arrived after reflection. This practice feels unnatural at first. Emotion demands speed. Training demands restraint. You will feel tension. Your body will want release. Your mind will want certainty. Your emotions will want expression. Training says no, not forever, just long enough to see clearly. This is how discipline begins, not by suppressing feeling, but by refusing to act from it immediately. Another part of training the mind is learning to tolerate discomfort. Most emotional reactions exist to escape discomfort. Anger releases pressure. Distraction numbs pain. Impulse promises relief. But relief is short-lived. The Stoics taught that discomfort is not an enemy. It is a teacher. When you stay present with discomfort without fleeing, you build endurance. And endurance weakens emotion's grip. A mind that can endure cannot be bullied by feeling. This is why the Stoics practiced voluntary hardship, cold, hunger, silence, simplicity, not to suffer, but to remind themselves that they could endure. When you know you can endure, fear loses leverage. Emotion thrives on avoidance. Discipline thrives on exposure. Training the mind also means retraining attention. Most people's minds are scattered. They cannot focus without stimulation. They cannot rest without distraction. They cannot think without interruption. A scattered mind is easy to overwhelm. The Stoics believed attention was sacred. Where attention goes, the mind follows. So they trained it deliberately. They limited unnecessary input. They chose silence over noise. They returned again and again to reflection, not because the world was evil, but because clarity requires space. A mind constantly consuming cannot govern itself. Training requires subtraction, less noise, less reaction, less indulgence in mental clutter. This is uncomfortable at first. Silence exposes thought. Stillness reveals anxiety. Slowness surfaces impatience. But this exposure is necessary. You cannot discipline what you refuse to see. Another part of training the mind is repetition of truth. Emotion repeats fear automatically. The mind must repeat clarity deliberately. The Stoics wrote to themselves daily, not for publication, not for applause, for reinforcement. They knew that truth fades if it is not revisited. So they returned to the same principles over and over. Control what you can, release what you cannot, endure what must be endured. Repetition builds grooves in the mind. Over time, clarity becomes reflex. This is when something shifts. You no longer need to force discipline. It begins to arise naturally. You still feel emotion, but it no longer hijacks you. You still experience fear, but it no longer commands retreat. You still feel anger, but it no longer demands expression. This is not suppression, it is mastery. And mastery changes identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone trying to be disciplined. You become someone who is. The Stoics believed this transformation was the highest form of freedom. Not freedom from difficulty, freedom from inner chaos. When the mind is trained, external events lose their power to destabilize. Storms still come, loss still happens, people still disappoint, but the foundation holds. And because the foundation holds, you can act deliberately instead of reacting blindly. This chapter is the turning point. You are no longer just observing the problem. You are stepping into the work. Not dramatic work, not visible work, quiet work. The kind that changes everything without announcing itself. This is where strength is forged. Accepting that some bridges must burn. There comes a point in growth where discipline alone is not enough. You can train your mind. You can govern your emotions. You can build internal strength. And still, something keeps pulling you backward. Not habits, not fear. People, relationships that belong to an older version of you. Connections formed before clarity arrived. Bonds built on who you were, not who you are becoming. The Stoics understood this truth without sentimentality. They knew that growth demands separation, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. Because not every relationship is designed to survive transformation. Some people know you only in your weakness. Some benefit from your confusion. Some are comfortable only when you remain small. And when you begin to change, the tension appears. They feel it even if they cannot name it. Your restraint unsettles them. Your silence irritates them. Your discipline exposes what they avoid. So they resist. Not always openly, often subtly, through guilt, through doubt, through reminders of who you used to be. They don't say, "Stop growing." They say, "You've changed." And they are right. The Stoics believed that loyalty to truth must come before loyalty to people, because loyalty to people without truth is self-betrayal. This is where many people fail. They continue carrying relationships that drain their energy because ending them feels uncomfortable. They tolerate disrespect because confrontation feels harsh. They remain accessible because distance feels selfish. But the cost is internal erosion. Every time you shrink to preserve a connection, you weaken the discipline you've built. Every time you silence your growth to keep someone comfortable, you fracture your integrity. The Stoics did not call this kindness. They called it weakness. Not moral weakness, strategic weakness, because it leaves your inner fortress exposed. Epictetus taught that you should keep company only with those who uplift you, not those who distract you, not those who diminish you, those who call forth your better self. This is not arrogance, it is alignment. People often misunderstand this principle. They think it means becoming cold, detached, isolated. It does not. It means being selective. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Access is earned through respect, shared values, and mutual growth. When someone repeatedly pulls you back into old patterns, they are not neutral. They are an anchor, and anchors feel safe until you realize you are not moving. This is where bridges begin to burn, sometimes deliberately, sometimes naturally. You stop explaining yourself. You stop justifying your boundaries. You stop seeking approval for your direction. and the distance forms. Some people leave quietly, others protest loudly. They accuse you of becoming distant, of thinking you're better, of abandoning them. But the Stoics were clear. Growth is not betrayal. Staying stuck to preserve comfort is. Another hard truth is this: some relationships only survive when you are struggling. They are built on shared pain, shared dysfunction, shared stagnation. When you heal, there is nothing left to connect. This is not cruelty. It is reality. Trying to keep these bonds alive requires returning to old wounds. The Stoics would never advise that. They believed that environment shapes character. Who you spend time with determines who you become, not because of influence alone, but because of tolerance. You slowly accept what surrounds you. If mediocrity surrounds you, you soften. If bitterness surrounds you, you harden. If discipline surrounds you, you sharpen. This is why bridges must sometimes burn, not in anger, not in drama, but with finality. Burning a bridge does not mean hatred. It means acceptance. Acceptance that some paths no longer align. Acceptance that certain versions of you must not be revisited. Fire prevents return, and sometimes return is the real danger. People romanticize keeping every door open, but open doors invite regression. The Stoics understood that clarity requires commitment, and commitment requires closure. Another reason bridges must burn is that growth demands solitude, not permanent isolation, but space. Space to think without interruption, space to practice discipline, space to become someone new. Constant connection to old dynamics prevents this. You cannot build a new identity while constantly reinforcing the old one. This is why many people relapse. They change internally, but remain externally embedded in the same environment. The pull is too strong. Burning bridges is not about revenge. It is about protection. Protecting your mind, protecting your discipline, protecting your future. The Stoics were not sentimental. They believed that every relationship had a purpose. When the purpose was fulfilled, attachment became harmful. Letting go was wisdom. This is where courage is required, because walking away means being misunderstood. People rarely applaud your boundaries. They feel them, and when they feel them, they react. They question your motives. They judge your character. They rewrite your story. The Stoics expected this. They knew that being right often looks like being alone, not permanently, but initially. But they also knew that alignment attracts alignment. When you create space, new connections form, not immediately, not dramatically, quietly. People who respect your discipline, people who do not demand your regression, people who walk forward with you. But this only happens when you stop carrying the old. This chapter is not a call to cruelty. It is a call to honesty. To stop pretending that every relationship is meant to last. To stop confusing familiarity with loyalty. To stop sacrificing growth to preserve comfort. The Stoics believed that character was shaped by association, and they chose their associations carefully. So must you. Some bridges must burn so you do not walk back when fear or loneliness tempts you to retreat. This is not loss. It is liberation, and it prepares you for the final truth. When you let go of what no longer serves you, you create space for who you are meant to become. Final closing. The decision. You've heard everything you need to hear. Not inspiration, not theory, instruction. You now understand the battlefield. You've seen how emotion hijacks the mind. You've learned how discipline restores order. You've faced the truth that growth demands separation. And you've seen that nothing changes without training. Now comes the part most people avoid. Decision. Not tomorrow. Not after another video. Not when motivation appears. Now. Because knowledge does nothing on its own. Understanding does nothing on its own. Insight without action is just entertainment. The Stoics never wrote to feel better. They wrote to survive reality. They trained themselves in silence. They governed their thoughts when no one was watching. They endured discomfort without applause. And they accepted loss as the price of freedom. That is the path you are standing on now. And here is the truth most people don't want to hear. You will fail at this. You will feel emotions surge again. You will hesitate. You will relapse into comfort. You will feel the pull to explain yourself, to react, to retreat. That is not failure. Failure is quitting. Failure is deciding this was powerful and doing nothing with it. Transformation is not dramatic. It is repetitive, quiet, often lonely, and it only belongs to those who return to discipline even after they slip. So choose. Will you continue living ruled by feeling, reacting, explaining, waiting, drifting, or will you live governed by reason, steady, restrained, deliberate, unshaken? No one can make this choice for you, not circumstances, not God, not time, not this video, only you. If you are done lying to yourself, do this. Choose one principle from this film. Apply it today. Apply it again tomorrow. Apply it when it feels uncomfortable. That is how character is built. If you understand this path, mark it. Comment, I act now. Not for attention, for commitment. Subscribe, not for content, but because this is training, not entertainment. And remember this as you leave. You cannot command the storm. You cannot control the waves. But you can train the mind that holds the helm, and a trained mind is something no chaos can conquer. The work begins now.